So the Vue Transitions API is finally here and can be used literally everywhere from like React, Next.js, Astro, and a lot more frameworks. This API actually allows you to do page transitions or state transitions super easily with stuff like, for example, you got a movie poster, you can click on it, takes to another page, and it's clearly this smooth transition happens between one page and another, or if you just choose another poster in here, the poster like expands and it shrinks. Maybe if you look at this website made by the Google engineers that uses the Vue Page Transitions API, it makes things look so good and so smooth moving from one page to another. So in this video, we're going to learn how to use the Vue Transitions API to create stunning transitions and awesome UI using React, Next.js, and HTML. So the Vue Transition API, what is that? Well, the Vue Transition API is a brand new experimental API. I think it was originally kind of like invented and proposed by Google and the Google web team. But this API kind of like facilitates how you do transitions and animations, particularly on the web. I know we already have tons of APIs for doing animation, from like CSS transitions to web animation API and so much more, but this API, this new Vue Transition API, is a lot simpler, and this actually works for a good reason, or pretty much it was invented for a pretty good reason. So if you take, for example, to this website in here made by the Google engineer, who's basically the guy like behind creating the web transition API and putting the spec for it. So there's actually a demo website called HTTP 203. This actually showcases how or why the Vue Transition API is pretty good and how it can make your website look and feel more of like a mobile sort of experience instead of like a very standardized web experience. So for example, in here we got like a bunch of videos. All of those are videos, and if you go for a second and click on a video, as you can see, kind of like it gives you that really nice look and feel of like expanding the image, and it just like push it up into that, and it just kind of like gives you this cognitive feel that you know exactly what's happening on the web page, and everything flows dynamically together. So for example, if you go back, as you see, like the image kind of shrinks back to its position, the same way as like, you know, mobile applications, or if you're familiar with iOS on like an iPhone or something, where you close an application and you just like have that shrinking right into where the application is located inside of the home screen or something like that. That's exactly what's happening in here. So everything in here is done using the Vue Transition API. And if you just take a deeper look into this one, there's actually a lot of moving part. For example, the title in here is actually a moving part. If you notice into it, like, oh, everything is moving inside of that one. Okay, so why do we need this feature? We already have a bunch of APIs like the web animation API in here, or the CSS transitions, CSS animations in here. All of those are already made working APIs on the web, and they are pretty good. Developers are familiar with it. Why do we need a new API? Basically, the whole API in here is actually to make page transitions a lot easier and make them look great compared to how we previously done those kind of page transitions. So just kind of like communicate the direction flow and make it clear which elements in here are related from one page to another. And because literally page transitions, or the truth to be said, state transitions are super hard even with the tools we already have. That's why we needed, or we had to invent a new API to make those page transitions easier, and like any developer can just pick up that API and make their pages kind of like transition the way you just saw in that particular demo. I really recommend you guys to go ahead through like both of these, like the documentation in here or the blog post from the developer.chrome.com and the MDM documentation, because it provides all the information that you need when you should use this API, when you should not, and all the examples in here. So for instance, if you take, for example, the MDN example that is provided, which is completely HTML. So for example, if you go from one image to another, as you can see, it just kind of like crossfades from one image to another. And the title in here is kind of like expands or shrinks depending on, you know, the long or the length of the actual text on the top right over there. So it's clear that it just makes it really nice. And everything in here is actually using the Vue Transition API. And literally, because this is an actual HTML feature, that means any framework, any library, any thing pretty much like React, Astro, Solid, anywhere pretty much where JavaScript actually runs and HTML runs on the web, this API can be used very easily and can be implemented so everyone can just enjoy it. Alright, so how does this actually work and how we can use it? Simple as that, it works with a single line of code, literally with a single line of code. All you gotta actually do is actually put the document in here. You do document, start transition view in here, and you give it a callback. This one, because it runs asynchronously, that's why you have to basically give it a callback in here. So once you give it a callback, the callback in here is gonna only run once the transition is like almost done. So basically, for the browser or the API, what it's actually going to do is actually going to take the old content or like the current page that you're currently in. It takes a full screenshot of it and actually takes a screenshot of the new page, and it kind of does the transition between both of them and animates between them. For example, if you do crossfading animation, you're going to animate between the old contents or the old page to the new page in here using crossfade. And technically in here, inside of the callback in here, you basically want to give it a function that updates the DOM. So for example, for instance in here, this function for us, update the DOM somehow, is actually responsible for updating them. For example, we have a movies application and we have this, like whenever we click on a movie, we want to showcase the page for the particular movie. So when we call this update the DOM, we want to actually just, switch, like remove all the list of movies and only show a single movie that was selected. The poster should be big, all the details about the movie, the rating, where the cinemas are and everything. So that's basically this is the function that's actually should be able to do that. And of course, once you actually do you give it the transition in here, the start view transition in here, that's going to use the callback in here, and it's going to actually do the transition between the old page and it's going to do it with the new page that's going to be actually changed with this particular function. I know it might seem a little weird and hard to grasp on this, but with an example, you will understand that for sure. The other thing you need to know about is actually this provides, or the view transition API provides us with like 5 kind of like pseudo-classes in here, CSS pseudo-classes we can use to customize the style and the animation of the different elements or the different pages when transitioning from one page to another. So for example, in here, the root elements is like the view transition in here. We have view transition group, we have like view transition image, we have the view transition old and the new. And most of the times, you're only going to care about the old one and the new one, because literally you want to actually apply some animation to the old when it actually gets removed and you want to jump to the new one. So you apply some animation to the old one. And technically, if you want to just go back to the previous page in here, that means you want to apply something to the new one. Most of the times, it's actually where you want to apply the animation, but the others can be also used for some advanced stuff, or they can be used literally all together. Now, let's see how we can actually implement this page transition in a framework like Next.js with React. Of course, we have Astro. Astro already supports that one, so I really advise you guys to go ahead and try Astro. It's a pretty nice framework, especially with the addition of View Transition API. They really nailed it with the implementation, so I really like that one. For Next.js, they still haven't supported that one just yet. I hope they do officially in the future, but for now, we can actually hack our way through to make that work with Next.js. And it's not even that super complicated thing. So luckily for us, there's actually a really nice guy that created a library for us, or more of like a hook for us, that allows Next.js to work out of the box just by calling this hook instead of the up file, and it's going to just support the view transitions API. So this is actually called the use view transitions. You can go ahead and install it using npm or yarn. Just do npm install or yarn install, and just as simple as that. And for Next.js, of course, there are 2 ways. Using the pages directory, which is the old way. For this one, it's actually pretty simple. All you gotta actually do is actually use next router view transitions hook, and you call it inside of the auth.js, and that is it. For the second one, the up router in here, you actually gotta call using like 2 components, and you put them inside of the root layout. The first one is enable router view transitions, and the second one is the auto view transitions on click. You make sure you both put them on the root layout. It's the root layout to make sure that actually works perfectly. So you could capture clicks and it knows exactly when to navigate on the old or the new page, and yada yada yada. Of course, These ways are a legit way to do it. It's not going to cause any performance issues or something, but they have some trade-offs as actually listed in the documentation. So for me in here, of course, I already did that. I did use next router view transitions. What you actually need to make sure you pass in the events from the use router. You grab the router, you do router.events, and you make sure you pass that one perfectly in there in order to make sure it actually captures the events and it knows exactly when to navigate back and forth and when to apply the view transitions API. Okay, so for our website in here, we've got a list of movies. All of these actually have movies in here. We have like popular movies of the week. And the awesome animation that we actually want to do, or the transition we want to do, is actually when we click on a movie in here, it takes us to a single page that is only single for that particular movie to like showcase the poster of the movie, the title of the movie, some info about the movie. So for example in here, if I click on that one exclusive in here, it goes to a brand new page, a Next.js page in here. It kind of like enlarges the kind of like poster in here for us from like depending on the previous page and this. If you compare them, if I go back for example on the previous page, it shrinks that into position. If I click on it, it just kind of like expands it and it keeps it in position. This is basically what the view transition API does. Of course, you can customize it to any animation you want, but by default, it kind of like animates the position, width and height, and it does some fading as well. Of course, if you notice the title in here and there's some details, if I go back in here exclusive them, they cross fade as well. If I click on them exclusive, they come up in here. All of those are customized animations. Of course, you can basically click on all of those and you can just, any movie in here, it just grabs it from the position. Exclusive just makes the user experience so smooth and so enjoyable. More of like you're basically working with a mobile device. Okay, so how did we do that? Of course, let's go ahead and take a look into this. For example, we've got the movies page. This is actually where we render the list of movies, like all this list of movies. This is actually the responsible one. It grabs the movies, of course, it fetches them from the API using get static props. It grabs the movies, it goes through movies.map, and it renders every single movie in here, passing it the movie data. Of course, if you go inside of the movie in here, all you simply have a link. This link is actually when we click on the poster of the movie, it takes us to the single page of the movie or the page responsible for the movie using like movies/movie ID, and you have like an image in here. The image is pretty simple, just like class name, src of the image, and the alt. And the special thing that we needed to add to the image to make it work with the transition API is the style view transition name. This one to mark a CSS view transition name property, and you give it like a unique name only meant for that particular image. And if you notice in here, we're just assigning a unique name depending on the movie ID. So every single poster of a movie is going to have a completely different like transition name here or view transition name, so you can transition differently compared to the others. That way we can have this really nice animation, kind of like expands and it shrinks back, and it knows exactly what to expand and what to shrink depending on that particular unique name of every single poster. And by default, you don't need to apply any animation because the view transition API by default applies the kind of like width, height, and position transforming animations out of the box for you. Of course, you need to put the style in here and the view transition name both on the movie, and also you need to put it exactly inside of like where you actually render the single page of the movie. As you can see here, movies ID, this is actually the component that is responsible for rendering every single movie, which is like the standalone page for the movie. You put the style and you need to put that one as well in there because they have to exist with the same exact name on both pages, so the browser API can know exactly like which image that is and which elements that was previously on the old page versus the new one, so you can kind of like do some transition between them. And that's basically all you need to provide. And because we're already using this use next router view transitions, it's actually behind the scenes, it's going to call the start view transition callback. The callback that we talked about before, that one is right here. Like when you call document start view transition and you give it like a callback, that's already going to be called automatically for you by the hook when the transition happens. So you don't have to worry about it. You only want to call this one when basically you're doing some HTML stuff, like vanilla HTML with JavaScript. You have to call this one. But when you use a framework, most of the times you're going to use like an integration, a hook, or something like that. That's going to allow you to do that automatically when the routing navigation happens. So now, what about this fig caption component? The fig caption has the movie title and whether it's like for adults only or for everyone. That's basically the same thing. You can basically go through in style and you can do like, oh, view transition name. You can add, for example, movie adults to that component and it can easily work for you, or you can customize everything in animation and how it fades or how it kind of like bounces through and all that kind of stuff with CSS. Unfortunately, it's not just yet supported with like Tailwind CSS. I hope they do that in the near future, but you have to use vanilla CSS. So I had to go through, create a style.css file, and instead of that one, actually put all the CSS needed. As you see in here, I have like fit caption h2. I'm already putting a view transition name for both of them in here, as the span as well. As you see in here, the h2 is the title, the span is, you know, adults or not adults. So I'm already naming those and giving them transition names. And here, if you're using the pseudo class we talked about before, for example, the view transition new, and you give it exactly which name that you want. For example, the movie adults, I want only the child that this particular child to affect that one. And as well for the title in here, I want them to do some animation. So I want like 300 millisecond, ease in, and I want like fade in animation and the slide up animation. So it kind of like fades in and it slides up pretty slowly when it enters. Of course, this is actually the entry animation because the new one represents the entering animation. And of course in here you can do like, oh, each one separately. In here you can do different delays, so you can delay between them. Now for the exit as well, the same thing. You use the old instead of the new one, where we're using the new in here. I can use the old for both like the movie adults and the title. And of course I can apply completely different animation, for example, like fade out and slide down instead of the slide up. And the same thing in here happens for like the animation delay for each one, for like title and movie adult. And of course for the keyframes in here, or like the fade out, the slide down, the slide up, all of those are actually custom keyframe animations using CSS keyframe animations that can be easily created in here and actually used. And that's, my friends, how you can do this really nice animation. When you click on it, it kind of like fades up or fades and slides up. Or if you go back, it kind of like slides down and fades out as well. And the same thing happens in here. All of them actually are looking pretty nice in here. They just make it look so nice and so smooth. This expanded animation, I really like it. And for instance, if you take, for example, Astro, because Astro has already this feature built in and it supports it super natively, so it makes everything look smooth. For example, this application, the Moves application, is built using Astro. So if you click, for example, the Spider-Man, you can see it expands and everything comes up in here really smoothly. When you go back, like it takes you to a new page, or we go back in here, that works fine as well. Or if you, for example, go through here and actually choose another actor, it kind of like expands it, it does the other page transition. So everything looks really well and super smoothly using the view transition API. So anyway guys, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed and hope you guys actually like this view page transition API, and maybe you can create something creative with it. Anyway guys, see you guys hopefully in the next ones.